We get ready for our weekly visit with Sam McKewon of the World-Herald. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, guys.
Hey, let's do. I think we're all in agreement. Nebraska is a better football team, but not yet ready to be the hunted. They like to be the hunter, but when they're hunted, you still got to figure that out. But let's start this conversation with a fit check. Where do you think Nebraska is now that we're a third of the way through the season? What's the reality of Nebraska football in 2024, a third of the way through the season?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things that I think about. One of them is that you have this conversation about complementary football. Coaches talk about this a lot, and it's, the offense and the defense and the special teams all sort of operating in a way that helps each other. And I think Nebraska's still working toward that. I think special teams hasn't necessarily been very helpful at times, and I'm not just talking about missed field goals, but punting and kickoff. I think Nebraska's offense is a quick strike operation that can put points on the board very quickly. But when you do that, your defense is out there probably a little bit longer, and I think Nebraska's defense, while a good unit, has been, I don't know, a little conservative. A little more conservative than maybe they were at times last season. And I think as a result, all those things kind of fit into a whole. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things about Dylan Raiola, right, is that, this is a kid that's got a lot of talent, and you're not going to just keep that, you're not going to keep that talent in a box. You're going to let him throw the football and use his skill set and all those things. But one of the reasons that I asked Matt Rule after the Friday night's game about running the ball more is I did feel like, Nebraska was like, let's just go out there and score as quickly as we can. And the reality is Nebraska's defense is actually a little undersized. Like, it's not the largest defense in the Big Ten by any means. And I think Illinois wore them down a little bit. And then you get to the overtime and it's like, well, let's, and Rule said it, let's take a shot. And that's all fine. But I just don't know that Nebraska has created necessarily its plan to win football games in the same way that it did last year. This year, it's get off to a fast start, get a lead, keep a lead. Last year, they wanted to sort of, pace themselves through the four quarters. I think they're still trying to figure out how to do that with a quarterback who can score really quickly.
Defensively, are you looking more at, and I know Matt Rule talked about, again, some of the missed tackles, the yards after contact, and those things that we've now seen for 2 weeks, but also the communication breakdowns. Is that more concerning, or is that, in your opinion, something that if we look at the category of fixable elements, that's a fixable one that can be fixed rather quickly?
It can be fixed immediately. But sometimes when you have situations where players are freelancing within a defense, the question becomes trust. Is everybody trusting everybody to do their job? Is everybody trying to make sure that they're doing their 111 versus trying to do more than what they're asked to do? And so sometimes what will happen in defenses, especially when you have Illinois trying to do 3 or 4 different things on every given play, is everybody's got to be responsible for everything. And as a result, if somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then it can look bad. The other thing to worth noting here is that Nebraska went to a man-to-man coverage style later in the game because the zone stuff wasn't working that well. They're not great at dropping into coverage. They've got some young guys that are doing that for the first time, Ty Wallen or Prince Willem and Yellen. And I think, again, you're running into situations where Illinois had kind of figured out what they wanted to do. And they were very efficient on third down, and they had an idea of where they wanted to throw the football, in Nebraska's zone. So then Nebraska goes man, and Nebraska didn't man it up very well. And so there's a lot of different circumstances in there that I'm sure Tony White will talk about today. The Husker defense is trying to work through a bunch of different things. And he's going to go in there and say, it's on me, and it's my fault,
right.
We need to be better, and all those things. And I appreciate all that. I think the deeper dive is, okay, how do you have enough defensive linemen and linebackers rotating through so that guys don't get worn down? And, can Nebraska think about its offense in a way where it's running the football a little bit more? And again, that's challenging because you're not going to just say to Dylan, hey, we're going to throw it 15 times today. And you're going to be we're going to put the light in the box here, and you're going to just stand back there and maybe throw a few passes, but we're not going to ask you to do very much.
Mm-hmm.
You want to ask Dylan Raiola to do a lot. But when you do that, you are going to expose your defense to more plays and more of the other team's offense. I don't know how many drives it was against Colorado, like 14. And Nebraska's defense played amazing that night, but they didn't play amazing against Illinois. And I think, again, plays accumulate over time, and you've got to be mindful of the exposure to your defense. Nebraska's defense in 2018 was probably better than its statistics suggested, but Scott Frost never slowed his offense down. And so that's something to watch, the complementary football aspect of what they do going forward.
So stick with defense here, because you said two things that triggered a question. What was your feeling on, I know they've been able in the first 3 weeks, they played a lot of guys. I mean, they're deep, and they want guys to get experience in different situations. But as they couldn't get off the field, it seemed like they were trying for any combination. They were substituting a lot in that game when they could, when Illinois would not go full tempo. What was what do you think that Rule and Tony White will pare down the amount of guys that are playing, or will it just be on a game-by-game basis that if Purdue all of a sudden goes from running 47 plays against Oregon State to running 75 on Saturday, we have no choice but to substitute guys on a regular basis?
I think it'll be the latter when you get into games where the play numbers are up in the 70s, because it's just too hard to ask Nash, Hutmaker, and Ty Robinson to play that many plays. I think that's really challenging, and a lot of guys don't do that. And so I do think there's opportunities to rotate when you're getting up into those numbers. I think when you're down in the 50s, I think you can probably lean more on some of your more elite guys. And I mean, that's what they trained all year for anyway. So, I think there's an opportunity for those guys to play it a little more. You're right that, they had a lot of different guys out there, Keona Davis and Kai Wallen, and Prince Will is basically a co-starter. I know he doesn't have a black shirt, but he's playing a lot. Like, he's playing half of the snaps. MJ Sherman's playing the other half of the snaps, and I think Prince Will had a few more. And so he's a much better pass rusher. So I think he's on the field for a reason. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got to find the right balance there between rotating guys in because depth issues, and then playing your best guys. I would just say that it's not going to be easy. And they're at a point where they're trying to build for the future, and they're trying to build a culture that's going to be good in year 3 and year 4 and beyond, but simultaneously win a whole bunch of games this season. And sometimes those tasks aren't easy to hold at the same time, which is why rules like, I told Riley Van Poppel to get his helmet. Yeah. You might have to play. And, there's a lot of things there. What I will say again is the complementary football piece is real. Iowa football is good this year. They're good. I don't give a crap if they lost by 1 point to Iowa State. They're going to take Ohio State to the wire. And they don't care about, they don't build their team around their quarterback. They didn't when C.J. Beathard was there, and they don't do it at all. They don't build their team around the quarterback. And they do what they do, and they're very complimentary in the way they play, and they win a lot of football games. Nebraska does not really want to play like Iowa. A lot of people don't want to play like Iowa, and that's fine. But the point is that, like, if you want to see what it looks like, that's what it looks like. And Nebraska doesn't want to do that, and that's okay. But their defense is going to be more exposed as a result, so they better score more points. So and they better find a way to be more efficient on offense.
Yeah. On the heels of what Nick asked you in your response, on the defense, does it appear to you, and remember, we spent an offseason where the head coach was talking about taking the ball away, and they were practicing it. Mm-hmm. Last year, the first guy in would make the tackle. Then if another guy came in, they might be going for the strip. It appears that it's reversed this year. Are you seeing the same thing?
I am. Yeah, I think I don't. And that was an interesting point about, the note about tackling, and he wants the first guy to go in and make the strike and knock the guy down, and that's fine. I mean, again, it's hard to be, and then MJ Sherman's flagged for trying to punch the ball out. Although the guy was kind of on the ground. So you got to time your punch a little bit better than that. But yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to create turnovers, and guess what? They did. They created 2 turnovers that should have led to 2 touchdowns. And those 2 touchdowns are pretty sweet. So I think Rule wants both. I think he wants the defense to both knock guys down and also create turnovers, and those things are fine. But yeah, I mean, it's a great point that they're probably going to go back to striking more, and that's fine. You may not force as many fumbles, but you're gonna get what you get, and that's perfectly okay. There's a lot of different levers that you can pull on a defense. You can create a defense that forces punts. You can create a defense that forces turnovers. Sometimes it's hard to create both. And Nebraska, again, they're betwixt and between. They're trying to figure out exactly who they want to be, and I think they're tweaking the knobs or whatever to try to figure out exactly who they want to be. I think they got to run the ball a little more, and they got to commit to that a little bit more. And in doing that, they're going to shave 4 or 5 minutes off the clock, and they're going to save their defense a little bit more time. They keep nothing wrong with big shot plays. There isn't. But they were very fortunate that Sierra Wright made the play that he did against Luke Altmaier, because otherwise, to go out there and do what you did on that one drive after Illinois ties it and fumble 3 times or whatever, and then put Illinois right back on the field, that was not good game management, in my opinion. And they got away with it because Sierra Wright makes the play, but Nebraska, I think, needs to run it just a little bit more, and they need to run it a little more with Emmett Johnson. I'm not exactly sure why he's not getting more carries.
Sam, are you in the school of thought, because this was obviously brought up yesterday? I know it's always the elephant in the room when Nebraska loses a close game, is what the emotion is like during those moments, mainly in the fourth quarter. And Matt Rule essentially verbalized that yesterday. Are you in the school of thought that they just need that breakthrough, a game like Illinois, but instead the ball goes through the uprights, or Dylan hits Lindenmeyer, that play is made? Are you in the school of thought that all it takes is maybe that one breakthrough moment where you can kind of exercise that demon, so to speak?
That sounds a lot like Scott Frost saying we need a break. And I'm not saying that Scott was wrong.
Yeah.
I think what Matt Rule said yesterday is they have to enjoy competing. Mm-hmm. And the byproduct of being competitive and not worrying about the final score is that sooner or later you're going to start winning those games.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to thread a needle rhetorically or otherwise that isn't the easiest to thread. But the reality is what you've got to do is just compete, and you've got to get in games, and you've got to make good decisions, and you just got to be competitive, and those games are going to tilt your way. I watched all those games last year. I've watched all the one-score games. I've been at all the games. And what I can tell you is that in a lot of those contests, the things that Nebraska could have done to win the games are not necessarily about this sort of biorhythmic relationship to winning and losing. I think there's decisions that are made, and there's things that happen early in the game that the dominoes tip late in the game. I watched Nebraska-Iowa last year. Iowa was a better team. I understand they only won 13-10, but they controlled the line of scrimmage in that game. And so, I remember that game really well. I watched the Michigan State-Nebraska game last year, and Nebraska sucked for the first quarter of the game. They weren't very good, and they were mad about how poorly they played. They weren't ready. Yeah, they lost the game 20-17 because Heinrich Haarberg had a long touchdown run or whatever it was. But you watch the games and you can tell why they lose. And it's not just because this magical number shows up. And so Nebraska's got to get better at just playing the whole football game. Mm-hmm. And against Illinois, again, there were a couple of opportunities in that second half where if you get a stop and then you turn around and make a score out of it, that game's probably out of reach. But Nebraska was not successful in doing that. And then when they have an opportunity to make a play to Lindenmeyer, Viola misses it. And you know what? That's not why they lost. But that happens sometimes. That happens.
Yeah, if they make it 24-10 when they had the opportunity, I think that game's over. I don't think Illinois was going to quit, but I think you're now up 2 scores, and I think the mindset ramps up a little bit more. I want to finish with you on this. So we've watched the overtime session. It might be the worst overtime session in the history of college football. I think Rule might have been kind yesterday, calling it a debacle.
Yeah.
What do you think happened, and is there something to be learned from that coaching staff if they're going to play in tight games? More than likely, one more time this year, they might be playing in overtime.
For sure. What could they learn? Well,
would you go on offense first if you have Dylan Raiola at your disposal?
People really go after me for saying that. You're really not supposed to. I'm a sort of a heterodox thinker. I think way more teams should go on offense first. And the reason I believe that is because I think coaches think about it from the perspective of, I want to know what I have to achieve by having the second possession. And I go from the perspective of, most of these players, when they know what they have to achieve, struggle to do it because of the pressure. And so I was saying yesterday, like, Vanderbilt's kicker goes out there and he looks like a cross-country runner on Saturday, the poor guy. And he hooked that ball into the lake. I mean, that was not a hard kick. That was a right-footed kicker. He just needs to put it out and kind of gently guide it in. And he put that thing basically in the bleachers. And that's just pressure. That's not, well, Missouri did this and this. No, he just hooked the ball. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happened, is that teams struggle with the pressure of knowing what they have to achieve. And so Nebraska goes out there, it's 31-24. And according to rule, we didn't really unpack it yesterday, but, according to rule, it was, they wanted to take a shot, quote unquote, right away. And I'm like, why? Okay. And so then they have a false start, and then they want to take the shot again, and then they get a sack, and there you go. And then, that was probably the end of it. They've had some disastrous overtimes in the last decade. This was probably the peak of that, and they haven't scored in overtime in the decade, and they haven't even gotten the first down. So it's running the ball might be good. Right. That might be something for people to consider.
This weekend, West Lafayette. Does the score matter?
I think it does matter. Yeah, I think
I know the result does, but the score.
Yeah, I think it does. I think if you want to see Nebraska continue to make progress, getting out of there with a 16-14 win would be concerning for the games that are coming. But yeah, a win is a win, and you'll take a win no matter how you get it. I suspect Purdue will limp into the game defensively, but they're going to try to do some different things this week. Their defensive coordinator basically said that on Monday. And offensively, Purdue's pass game is not what it's supposed to be, but they lost all their receivers to the transfer portal in the offseason. And so they're trying to transition to a completely different group of guys. And I think they're just having a hard time. So, I think Nebraska can win that game by a couple of scores. And if they're able to do that, then I think, they'll probably feel better coming back home. But Rutgers and Indiana are a real team that can beat Nebraska. And so you can't mess around with any of the next three games at all.
Yeah. I agree. Sam, as always, appreciate the conversation. Safe travels out to West Lafayette.
All right. Take care.